without delay, we're going to get into this segment on finishing up painting the boots and skin tone. Actually, in this segment, it's just the boots. And we have roughly 36 minutes of duration on this video because it takes that long just to paint the boots. So our last segment, we'll dedicate that to the actual skin tones and other details on Bane. But this is where we left off. And we ended up, now we've got two Banes here. This is our finished one, and the first one I finished off. And this is the second one that I showed you how to fix the hands and how to fix the legs on Bane so they don't fall off. But this is where we want to get to. We want to have a skin tone that looks really, really good. That looks as well as real as possible. The details on the pants, etc., that's all going to depend on your taste. This video will focus solely on the boots. We're going to start from the ground up. So in the last videos, we answered a few of the questions that some people had as far as how the process is on a lot of these projects, for this particular one being Bane. And no, we're not going to focus on adding light. We're going to focus on the boots. This is one of the styles, which is very simple, a lot of dry brushing. We're not going to use any airbrushing whatsoever because not a lot of people have an airbrush. So we're going to center only on synthetic brushes and acrylic paint for this video. So in the last segment, we did answer a few of these questions that people write in as far as wanting to know these particular details. And this is the one that's going to focus on the paints that we use, or that I'm using, which are acrylic paints. I'm using some of the testers and some off-brand paints like craft paints. But this is our starting point. This is no paint. This is out of the box. And this is where we want to get to. This is the first one that I picked up and finished off, and I was really happy with it. This is before I added all of the lighting to it. However, again, this video focuses on the boots, and we're starting now. So we're going to start off with a very simple technique to get you a very simple look. And again, this is only a beginning. We're going to use synthetic brushes simply because they endure that much more work, or I should say abuse. And synthetic brushes are much easier to clean, especially if you're going to end up using anything like turpentine or thinner, or you're going to be using acrylics that require that kind of a cleaning. We're going to be using acrylics that are just water-based. But the synthetic brushes are so much more durable than the sable brushes. Sable brushes require much more care and conditioning. So we're going to start off with a graphite powder. And the graphite is very dirty, so set up your station to capture any of the fall or the excess graphite that comes off. It doesn't take very much, so you just take a very small amount what you're loading onto your brush and then transferring it to the actual surface of the boot. So in this case, I'm going to take a medium brush. I'm going to load it up with a little bit of that powder and add it to the lid. I'll use that as my source instead of the actual can that's back there. And this is where we want to get to. This is the look that it gives us. It gives us a textured look without going too deep. And then of course you can add some dry brush work with gray paint. But I'll show you that in just a moment. So first of all, I've already sprayed this down with Mr. Super Clear, so I don't have to add any base primer to the boot. So the Mr. Super Clear gives us a nice texture for this to hold on to. And again, this is a very basic job on the boots. We're only going to apply it to the areas of leather. We're not going to apply it to the textured areas that would otherwise be fabric. So again, only to the areas that would be leather. And you can see here already how it picks up the light in the surrounding environment. Now once you're finished with applying the graphite to the desired look, then you're going to shake off the excess, clean your station, and then cover it or protect it with Mr. Super Clear. And again, that Mr. Super Clear is pretty cool stuff. It's expensive. You can get it from Amazon. However, it's still going to be expensive. Nevertheless, you have to have it in an area that is well ventilated, and you can either do that outside or maybe in a bathroom where you've got a fan or a window, and just make sure you stay clear of the fumes. And of course, it is flammable, so be in an area that there are no sparks that are going to cause a flame. It dries very quickly, so you don't have to have a hair dryer to dry it even quicker. You can if you want. However, it dries within minutes and it's ready to use right away. So as you can see here, I'm just covering all the little melting crannies that I can find that apply to a textured leather surface on the boot. Take your time, it's not a race. Again, you just want to make sure you cover all those areas so you don't have to come back and do it again after you hit it with Mr. Super Clear. Make sure you put away the excess and clean up your workstation before you continue on to the next step. So after applying the graphite, I'm going to hit it with some Mr. Super Clear. And remember, this stuff is toxic, so have good ventilation. Do it outside preferably, but if you're indoors, make sure you have a fan or you've got a window open. And once again, this stuff is awesome. It protects it really well. It's even a UV protectant, but it provides a really good tooth for any additional paint that you're going to do. In this case, we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing to bring up some of the details. So this is what it looks like now. This is our before, and now we're going to get this all different with some gray Testors paint. It's just a straight gray. There's no funny name to it. It's just gray acrylic. We're going to use our same medium brush. We've cleaned it first, and now we're just going to take a little bit of paint and load it up with just the right amount to use a dry brush technique. And dry brush is just what it sounds like. The brush is almost dry. There's almost no paint on it. So we're actually rubbing the bristles against the grain or against the texture to highlight any details. Now the reason you want to do it this way is because you can control how much detail you want to bring out. So if it's not enough, you just go back over it and you control how much of the texture you want to highlight. If you add too much, then you've got to take away, and it just really creates more problems because then you've got to actually paint over it and start over, and you don't want to do that. You just want to control the look of your texture by controlling the amount of dry brushing. And as you can see, the dry brushing will totally change the look of the texture you are covering. It's going to take a whole different aspect, a whole different mood. So depending on the colors that you want to use, that will also change how your end figure is going to look like. Again, it's not a race. Take your time. That way you can get the look you are after. And by going slower, if there's any point in that transition that you see is an issue or it's starting to look wrong, you can quickly change it because you haven't gone too far. So you can see here that we're going against the grain, and you can see those highlights picking up by doing the dry brushing. So already it looks so different. And if this is as far as you want to go, then that's it. Now here I've already added some silver to the steel toe to give it a more dynamic look. I'm going back in and using the edge of the bristles in a stippling technique only to bring up some details. So you can either add more silver to make more wear and tear, or you can go back in and use a different color like an earth tone and make it look like it's rusted or it's dirty, and you can give it another dynamic that way. So this really all depends on what you have in mind. It doesn't have to look like somebody else's paintwork. You can make it all your own. If you wanted to have them red, or if you want to have them blue, hey, that's fantastic. But again, this is our first technique. And if this is as far as you want to go because you don't consider yourself a advanced painter, that's fine. This will still look really good on your shelf. And this is it. You can then just finish off some of the details with some of the silver to add some more fine color separation. In this case, the steel toe. If you overpainted some of the areas like the sole, then you can go back in with the black and clean those up. You just got to make it look like you envisioned it. Again, if you make a mistake, because they are black boots, just repaint it black and start over. Not a problem. So for me, this is just very simple. It's very basic. Now these already look that much better than the first figure, and we'll show you a comparison later. However, again, we can do even more. So personally, I like details in my figures, and the more there are, the happier I am to make them look as real as possible. So I'm going back in and adding a little bit of silver on those areas that would be silver on this particular boot. And on this side, it has more of those characteristics than the other. So with a fine tip brush, I'll just load it up and very carefully paint those in. Now, if you have a problem seeing anything that's this small, then just get yourself some magnifiers to be able to get up nice and tight. Or, if you like, just use your cell phone as a magnifier and get in there. Personally, it's a little difficult to do that, but it's easier to do that with the magnifying glasses, and it just makes it that much more comfortable, and you'll find that you'll be able to get some extreme details out of your figures. So I hope you like this particular style. For most, it's pretty acceptable. I mean, I like it, but this is where we started. This is our before and after, and you can see there's a big difference already. It'll look really good on the shelf, but for my personal taste, it's okay for the first figure. This is the second figure. Now I want to show you a different technique and how to take it just a bit further. This is our before and after. They look pretty cool. I do like them, no problem with that. But now we're going to change brushes. We're going to go with the round tip brush, a little bit pointier, a little finer tip. Again, it's a synthetic brush, and this is our next step. We're going to go into the leather look. So we're going to mix up some brown, some yellow, and a little bit of that reddish brown. And we're going for an extreme boot color. So we're going to have a two-tone boot, a sand color and an olive green. So I've already sped up the video because it's extremely long and I don't want to bore you to death. I just want to show you the technique. So we're adding just enough water for the paint to be thin enough to spread correctly. We don't want to do it as a wash. Now, because it is an acrylic, it is not going to cover on the first pass. So don't expect to cover all of the black on the first pass. Just go over it once, let it dry, work on the other side, and go over it again. Now, if you have different tones of this sand color, a little more orange or a little more yellow, don't worry. It's a leather look, and leather usually tends to shift color even in a large area or a small area. So it'll give it that much more realism. So while the other side dries, you start working on the one that's unpainted. And the same thing. Just stay within the area that is supposed to be leather. Paint it in layers. Get as close as you can to those tiny little areas as possible. And if not, leave those for last. Just come back with a different size brush and get into those tighter areas. But take your time. Again, it's not a race. This is your figure. You're the one who's going to be looking at it, and you're the one who's going to decide how much color is too much or what is too little. So take a look at the figure at an arm's length, and then set it up where you would probably view it, and that'll tell you if those colors are either too bright or just not bright enough. Now, if you see some of the black coming through, not a problem. You can use that to your advantage to use it as shading. Again, just paint it in layers. In layers, you'll be able to control the depth and the color rendition of that paint that you are applying to that particular area. Now for this particular part of the project, I'm using craft paints, and I did mix it in with a little bit of the Tester's yellow. I like the craft paints. One, they're inexpensive. Two, they dry in a matte finish, and as they dry in a matte finish, they leave a texture. So it's even easier to go back in with a dry brush and bring out even more texture on that surface. They apply really well, they are long lasting, and they're inexpensive. And for playing around, they're great. So they do endure a long shelf life. Like anything else stuff, you're gonna put them up where the sun is gonna hit them, any paint is gonna fade away. So just be careful with it, whatever paint you use. Make sure you cover it with your Mr. Super Clear or your Model Masters matte finish or gloss finish, whatever you're going to use. In this case, I'm going to use Mr. Super Clear. So I'm going back in and adding some details. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind, I should say not details yet, a second coat of the paint, because I want to cover up some of those black areas. You have to keep in mind that with these paints, or any brand of paint, the colors usually tend to dry darker. So while it looks brighter when you're applying it, when you come back as it's dry, you're going to see a change in color. And as you can see where I'm applying a new coat, the coat looks lighter than the paint that's already dry. So keep that in mind, that if you mix something too dark, it might dry even darker. So going light is actually to your benefit, because you can control how dark it's going to be. If it's too dark, then it's more difficult to bring it back in a lighter tone, because you'll then have to add too much paint, and in doing so you may cover up details that you otherwise would have kept if you had gone in a lighter tone in thinner layers. Again, there's no right or wrong in painting these boots. It's all going to determine what you want to see as a final product or what art reference you are using. Personally, I just wanted to have some different boots on this Bane. And one of those was to add some olive green to make it look kind of a military color. So that's one of the other colors we'll use on other segments of the rest of the body. Now, if you've noticed, the legs haven't fallen off. The hands haven't fallen off. So the fixes that we made are actually working. Now, if you didn't see that video, you can go to the link or go to the a segment where all of the other videos are, and you'll be able to follow the process of fixing the hands and fixing those legs. This is just focusing on painting the boots. And I'm sorry that I got off camera here. It's hard to see when I'm painting and have the phone in front of my face. But as you can see, I'm now adding the olive green. Now I've thinned out the olive green just enough that the paint will be able to get into those crevices. If I use the paint straight out of the bottle, it's too thick and it covers a lot of the texture too far, which means I would lose the texture. I only want to have coverage to have the color. I don't want to lose the texture. Again, it's going to dry darker. Right now we see a very, very light olive green. As it dries down, it's going to become darker and it'll show us exactly what spots we missed. So again, I'm using the same round fine tip brush and I'm just pushing the paint into those little gaps. I'm not doing anything extraordinary or excessive with the paintbrush. I'm starting off at the edges and then filling in the center. Starting with the most difficult part, which is coming as close to the edge details as possible, and then filling in the center, which is the easiest. And then going from one side to the other and adding a second coat where I think is going to be needed. So as you can already see, I already did some dry brushing in a different color to the leather to highlight the texture. And it's that same brown, I just added a bit more white to it. And I came up with that sandy look on the boots. So the green that I am applying to the boot is covering up any of the texture that went over onto the areas that should be green. So I'm basically just cleaning up any of my overpainting or my mistakes from doing the dry brush on the leather. But as you can see, that dry brushing on the boots already takes on a different look, just simply because it really picks up the texture from the paint as it dried. And because again, this paint dries in a matte finish with the texture, it really allows the dry brushing to bring out even more characteristics of that particular form or shape or the texture that you're bringing out in that particular figure. So once your paint is dry, you can go back in and touch up any areas you may have missed, or if you touched a spot that was wet, cover it up again. Now, before you go on to the next step, make sure that you used your Mr. Super Clear and covered up and protected your work. Now we're going to add a red wash to the leather areas. And remember, a wash is paint that is so thin that you'll be able to see your palette, your mixing palette, through the paint. If you can't see it, then the paint is too thick. A wash is just that. It just stains the paint that it's going to go over. In this case, we can still see the silver through the orange or gold red that we're applying. We're only staining the paint that's underneath. And we're going to go ahead and do that to all of the silver, just so we have a matching look, a continuity throughout both of the boots. If you want to make one different than the other, that's fine. It's totally up to you. Again, it's just going to be the look that you want to give it. Nobody's figure is going to be the same. Nobody sees the same color red. Nobody sees the same color blue. That's why there's so many different blues with different names. So in this case, once we finish here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add another Mr. Super Clear to protect what we have there. If you need to, use the hair dryer and go back in and dry it before you use the Mr. Super Clear. Now I'm going back in over the silver and giving it a red wash as well. And right now it's starting to look really good. I'm pretty happy with this. there's just one more thing we got to do. Let's go in and add some more contrast with the silver around these gold buttons or studs or whatever they are. So this contrast is just going to give it some more pop. The black is cool, it's nothing wrong with it, but look at the difference this is going to make. And again, switch brushes, go to a fine tip brush and just get in as close as possible. Now I'm just using an older brush, that's why it's got that funny tip on it. The more you take care of your brushes, the more they last. Again, this is a synthetic brush and it's going to take a more abuse than a sable brush. It requires less conditioning, but will last just as long and will paint just as good as a sable brush. So we've got two of these, one on each side of the boot. And again, that's all going to depend on the details you want to add to maybe the buckles that are on there. Now, if you go over onto the other surfaces, you can paint back over it if you've got some extra paint. So that's one of the good reasons why you want to keep track of the paint that you have, especially if you've mixed your own colors, mix a little bit extra and keep it in a small container so you can go back in and do any touch-ups that you need. Or just make sure you remember that recipe that you use to mix those particular colors. Again, I mix my own colors, I don't go by names, so I couldn't tell you exactly what it is that I use. I used those colors that I mixed, and that's it. I don't have any special names for them. You can name them afterward if you want. Now in this case, we've got enough going on here, but there's still one more thing we need. And I'm looking at this, and it's time to do a little bit of cleanup and a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go back in with the silver because I overpainted these, and I'm going to go in and add those eyes or eye holes around the laces, the shoelaces. I want them to pop. So as you see, I overpainted them, and I go back in and paint them back in using the same brush. I've just cleaned it and just putting back in my silver. Again, this is all going to depend on how much detail you want to see in your end product. If the other was enough, then that's great. For me, I really need to see that much more because I'm going to be looking at it. It's going to be on my shelf. Looking at the boots, there's obviously some spots that were untouched, and that's the spaces between the shoelaces. And those would most likely be the same color as the olive green on the other parts of the boot. So we'll do the best we can and cover up those areas, and then any other details such as the laces themselves, we can come back and clean up with some black paint and just paint over any of the green that we see on the laces. In the meantime, we'll wipe off any excess so that we can paint them easier and it dries quicker. And because this is the only boot that actually shows the laces, it's not going to be much trouble. The other boot doesn't have as many laces showing through, or I should say the tongue on the boot doesn't show through the shoelaces because of the guard that's in front of it. So those details are going to make, again, all the difference on the boot, and it all going to depend on what you want to see finalized. So there's one more thing that I'm looking at here, and I do believe we need a few more details in between these laces. Looks like I missed a few spots, and that's only because I have the camera up on top of this figure. Otherwise I really can't see them. They're that small. So that's why I'm saying that to some people it may be just enough because they can't see them to begin with. That's all going to depend on your taste. So take your time, look at the figure, see if it's what you like. If not, you can always change it. There's nothing wrong with going back and changing the look of the figure that you're trying to achieve. So I went ahead and added a final layer of black wash to the boots. It just gave it a better realistic look to the leather. And I just added a one stroke and then spread it out with the sponge. And if you take a look, it actually beads up because I have the Mr. Super Clear sprayed on here. So wherever the black wash ended up beading up, it ended up staining it darker. And if you take a look, it looks that much more realistic. It gives it that much more character without doing too much work. This is the kind of thing that after it's done and you look at it on the shelf, you're really going to be proud of the work you've done. Again, once this is dry, make sure you cover it with a Mr. Super Clear or cover it with whatever other varnish or clear coat that you have to protect all that work. Now take a look. Just the stippling with the sponge is causing those textures to really pop. Even if you go over the green with the sponge, don't worry about it. It's just going to give it that much more character. I really like the way the black wash turned out here. I even added it to the metal portions and I like the way they turned out. They look really awesome. So I'm going to leave you with some video of some before and after segments. I hope that you liked the video. Give it a like, share it, comment, and of course, please subscribe. I want you to subscribe because I've got 2 more segments on this topic alone. We've still got to paint the pants and we got to paint that skin tone. So I hope to see you in the next one. In the meantime, keep customizing your action figures.